Caleb Monroe came back to Kentucky after 3 years in Dubai with a new watch, a full bank account, and the foolish hope that money had kept his mother safe. But the house he had been paying to repair was locked, freshly painted, and occupied by strangers. Behind it, beside a rusted storage shed, his elderly mother lay on a broken cot under a plastic tarp, too weak to lift her head. When Caleb called her name, she opened her eyes and whispered, "Don't tell Martin you found me. Welcome to today's story." If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. But 3 years earlier, Caleb had left believing sacrifice was the same thing as love. He had told himself that all the way across the ocean. Every month, without fail, he sent money home, sometimes more than he could afford, sometimes enough to make his own life in Dubai feel smaller for a while. He worked long days under a white-hot sun, managing construction crews, sleeping in a rented room with thin curtains and a humming air conditioner that never cooled anything enough. But whenever the transfer confirmation appeared on his phone, he felt better. That money meant his mother had groceries. It meant her roof did not leak. It meant her medicine was paid for. It meant he had not abandoned Lillian Monroe. At least, that was what he needed to believe. When his flight landed in Louisville, Caleb stood at baggage claim with a leather duffel at his feet and a tightness in his chest he could not explain. He had not told his mother he was coming. He wanted to see her face before anyone could prepare her. He wanted to walk through the door of the old house, hold her in his arms, and tell her she would never have to worry again. He had even brought the key, the same brass key she had pressed into his hand the morning he left. "This will always be your home," she had told him. He rented a black SUV and drove east through rolling Kentucky roads, past horse farms, gas stations, church signs, and long stretches of quiet fields. The closer he got to Claiborne County, the harder his heart beat. He tried calling her twice. Both calls went straight to voicemail. That bothered him, but he pushed the worry down. Maybe her phone was dead. Maybe she was napping. Maybe she would scold him for spending too much money on the trip and then cry into his shirt anyway. By late afternoon, he turned onto Briar Creek Road. The road looked smaller than he remembered, narrower, rougher. The ditches were full of weeds. The mailbox posts leaned like tired men. Then he saw the white fence at the edge of the property, and for 1 second, relief moved through him. Then he slowed down. The house was wrong. The porch had been rebuilt. The shutters were new. Fresh blue paint covered the siding. 2 rocking chairs sat out front, but they were not his mother's. There was a bright wreath on the door and a silver pickup in the driveway. Caleb sat there with both hands on the steering wheel. This was the house he had paid to repair. This was the house where his mother was supposed to be waiting. He got out slowly. A woman in her 50s opened the front door before he reached the steps. Her face tightened with caution. "Can I help you?" Caleb looked past her into the hallway. The walls had been repainted. The old family photographs were gone. "I'm looking for Lillian Monroe," he said. "This is her house." The woman's expression changed, not surprise, pity. "My husband and I bought this place last winter," she said carefully. "From a man named Martin Vale. Everything went through the county. We have the papers." Caleb felt the words enter him one by one. "Bought. Martin, papers no," he said. "That's not possible." The woman stepped back, uncomfortable now. "I'm sorry. We were told the owner had moved in with family." The air seemed to thin around him. Caleb turned away from the porch and looked across the yard. The old shed still stood behind the house, rusted along the roof, half hidden by tall grass. Beyond it, near the fence line, something moved under a gray plastic tarp. At first he thought it was a pile of old blankets. Then he heard a cough, small, dry, human. His body moved before his mind did. He crossed the yard fast, shoes sinking into damp ground, heart hammering so hard it hurt. The smell hit him first. Old metal, sickness. Then he reached the tarp and pulled it back. His mother lay on a broken cot. Lillian Monroe, who used to iron his shirts even when he told her not to. Lillian, who had once stood straight-backed in church and sang louder than anyone. Lillian, who had told him to go make a life and never let poverty teach him shame. She was smaller now. Her cheeks had hollowed, her lips were cracked. One thin hand rested against her chest. Beside the cot sat an empty water bottle, a paper cup, and a prescription bottle with no pills inside. Caleb dropped to his knees. "Mom," her eyelids fluttered. "Mom, it's me, it's Caleb." For a moment, she only stared at him like his face had come from a dream she no longer trusted. Then her eyes filled. "Caleb," she whispered, his breath broke. He reached for her hand, but she flinched. Not from him, from something behind him, from the house, from the road, from a fear that had lived with her longer than he knew. "Mom, what happened? Why are you out here?" Her fingers closed weakly around his wrist. "Don't tell Martin you found me." The name landed like a stone in his chest. Caleb looked back at the house he had paid for, then at the woman who had raised him lying under plastic like something the world had thrown away. "I'm taking you to a hospital," he said. He slid one arm beneath her shoulders and another under her knees. She weighed almost nothing. That terrified him more than the shed, more than the house, more than the stranger at the door. As he carried her toward the SUV, Lillian suddenly gripped his sleeve with a strength he did not know she still had. Her eyes locked onto his. The house, she breathed. It was never supposed to be sold. The house, she breathed. It was never supposed to be sold. The words stayed with Caleb all the way to Lexington. His hands tightened around the steering wheel every few minutes as he drove. In the rearview mirror, he kept checking on his mother. Lillian sat slumped against the passenger seat, wrapped in the blanket he had found beneath the tarp. Her eyes drifted closed and opened again. Each breath seemed to take effort. Twice he tried asking questions. Twice she only whispered that she was tired. By the time they reached the emergency department, the son had already disappeared. The nurses moved quickly the moment they saw her condition. A wheelchair appeared, then another nurse, then a doctor. Within minutes, Lillian vanished behind a set of swinging doors. And for the first time since finding her, Caleb was left alone. The silence hit him hard. He sat in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights and stared at his hands. 3 years. 3 years of overtime shifts. 3 years of missed holidays. 3 years of believing he was doing the right thing. Every month he had sent money, every month. Yet somehow his mother had ended up starving behind her own house. Nothing about it made sense. His phone buzzed, a banking notification. The sight of it made something twist inside him. Without thinking, he opened his banking app. Transfer appeared. Thousands of dollars. Month after month, each one sent to the same account. Martin Vale. The notes beside them felt almost cruel now. Mom's medication, property taxes, roof repairs, care support, winter heating. He stared at the screen, then he lowered his head. A nurse approached nearly an hour later. "Mr. Monroe?" He stood immediately. "How is she?" The nurse gave him a careful look. "She's stable for now. For now." 2 words that offered no comfort. "The doctor would like to speak with you." The physician was a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a calm voice. She led Caleb into a small consultation room. "Lillian has significant heart failure," she said. Caleb felt his stomach drop. The doctor continued. "She also shows signs of severe dehydration, malnutrition, and inconsistent medication use." "Inconsistent?" The doctor nodded. "There are prescriptions she should have been taking regularly." She opened a chart. "Our records show several missed refills." Caleb stared at the pages. "That can't be right." The words sounded weak even to him. The doctor looked at him kindly. "I'm sorry." Caleb looked away. He remembered wiring money specifically for prescriptions. He remembered Martin sending photographs of pill bottles on kitchen counters. He remembered believing them. The doctor continued speaking, but her words became distant. Heart failure, missed medication, malnutrition. Each phrase felt like an accusation, not against Martin, against him. Hours passed before Caleb was finally allowed into Lillian's room. The sight nearly broke him. His mother looked impossibly small beneath the hospital blankets. An oxygen tube rested beneath her nose. Machines beeped softly beside the bed. For a long moment he simply sat beside her. Then he reached for her hand. This time she didn't pull away. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Her eyes opened slowly. "Caleb, you should have called me." A faint sadness crossed her face. "I thought you stopped caring." The words hit harder than anything else that day. "What?" Lillian looked toward the ceiling. "Martin said things were difficult." Her voice was barely audible. "He said your work wasn't going well anymore." Caleb stared at her. "He told me you couldn't keep sending money." A chill spread through his body. "Mom, he said you needed to focus on your own life." Caleb stood abruptly. "No." Lillian looked confused. "No, that's not true." His voice shook. "I sent money every month." Her eyes widened slightly. For several seconds neither of them spoke, then tears appeared in the corners of her eyes. Every month? The room suddenly felt too small, too hot, too painful. Caleb turned away before she could see his expression. Someone had lied not once, not twice, for years. The next morning, after barely sleeping, Caleb sat in the hospital cafeteria with a laptop open in front of him. Coffee cooled beside his hand. He was searching county property records, tax documents, public filings, anything. The house appeared after only a few minutes. The property had been transferred 8 months earlier. His pulse quickened. He clicked deeper. Owner history, transfer documents, deed records. Then he found it. A scanned document. Seller Lillian Monroe, buyer Briar Creek Holdings LLC, Representative Martin Vale. The room seemed to tilt. Caleb zoomed in. There it was. A signature. His mother's name. Neat, clean, confident. Nothing like the trembling handwriting he had seen on birthday cards over the past few years. He printed the file at a hospital business center and carried it upstairs. Lillian was awake. Quietly, he placed the paper on her tray. She adjusted her glasses, then she froze. Color drained from her face. I never sold the house. Caleb felt his heart pound. Then why is your signature on the deed? Lillian stared at it for several seconds. Her hand began to tremble. I remember signing something. What? I don't know. The fear in her eyes was real. He brought papers. Martin? She nodded. He said they were insurance forms. The room went silent. Caleb looked back at the signature. Insurance forms. Yet somehow the house had changed owners. His jaw tightened. Someone had turned trust into a weapon. A knock interrupted them. A hospital billing clerk stepped inside carrying a folder. Mrs. Monroe, the woman smiled politely. We just need to verify a few old notices. Lillian looked confused. The clerk opened the file. These were mailed several times over the last year. She read an address, the old house. Caleb frowned. Mailed? The clerk nodded. Multiple unpaid balances. His stomach dropped again. How many notices? The woman checked. 6. Lillian looked stunned. I never got them. The clerk hesitated, then nodded slowly. They were never returned to us. Caleb felt anger rising again. Someone had been collecting her mail. Someone had been intercepting information. Someone had been controlling what she saw. The clerk left. The room fell quiet. Then Lillian spoke. Caleb. He looked up. For the first time, there was fear in her eyes that seemed deeper than illness, deeper than poverty, deeper than losing a house. Martin used to come with me sometimes. To the hospital? She nodded. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. There was one visit. Her voice dropped. Something happened. Before she could continue, another nurse entered to begin an examination. Lillian fell silent immediately. She wouldn't say another word. Hours later, as Caleb stepped into the hallway, the same nurse who had admitted his mother caught up with him. She glanced around to make sure nobody was listening. Then she lowered her voice. Mr. Monroe, yes? The nurse hesitated. I probably shouldn't be saying this. Caleb's pulse quickened. What is it? The nurse looked back toward Lillian's room. Then she said quietly, Your mother was here last year. Caleb frowned. What happened? The nurse's expression darkened. She wasn't talking much. A pause. But I remember something. Another pause. And I remember the man who came with her. Caleb already knew the answer. Martin. The nurse nodded. Then she leaned closer. When I asked your mother if she felt safe going home with him, she stopped. For a moment, she looked genuinely troubled. Then she finished the sentence. She looked terrified to answer. The nurse's words followed Caleb long after she walked away. She looked terrified to answer. Not nervous, not confused, terrified. He stood alone in the hallway for several seconds, staring through the small window in his mother's door. Lillian was asleep again. The oxygen machine hissed softly beside her bed. For the first time, Caleb stopped asking himself what Martin had done. Instead, he started asking how long it had been happening. The next morning, he checked out of his hotel before sunrise. He had spent most of the night organizing documents, bank transfers, property records, medical notices. Copies of everything sat inside a thick folder on the passenger seat beside him. For 3 years, he had trusted Martin without question. That ended now. The drive back to Claiborne County felt different. Before, he had come looking for answers. Now, he was coming for the truth. The town looked exactly the same as it always had. The diner still sat beside the courthouse square. The church steeple still rose above the trees. People still waved to one another from pickup trucks. And somewhere among them was Martin Vale. a respected man, a trusted man. A man who, according to every official record Caleb had seen, had done nothing wrong. That was the problem. The paperwork told one story, his mother told another. Around noon, Caleb parked near the County Veterans Center. A charity fundraiser was taking place on the front lawn. White tents, food trucks, local politicians, business owners, veterans wearing service caps. And standing near the center of it all was Martin, laughing, shaking hands, accepting compliments, looking perfectly comfortable. Caleb felt something cold move through him. His mother had been sleeping beneath a plastic tarp. Meanwhile, Martin was being treated like a community hero. He walked straight toward him. The smile disappeared from Martin's face the moment their eyes met. For a split second, something flashed there. Shock. Then it vanished. Caleb. Martin spread his arms as though greeting family. Nobody told me you were back. Caleb stopped a few feet away. That's because I didn't tell anybody. Several people nearby looked between them. Martin recovered quickly. How's your mother? The question sounded almost insulting. Caleb stared at him. You tell me. A brief silence followed. Martin lowered his voice. Maybe we should talk somewhere private. No. Caleb didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. We can talk right here. People nearby were already pretending not to listen, which meant they were listening carefully. Martin forced a smile. You're upset my mother was living behind her own house. The smile faded. Martin glanced around. That's not the whole story. Then tell me the whole story. For a moment neither man moved. Finally Martin sighed. I did everything Caleb almost laughed. Everything he could. The words felt absurd. Martin continued. You were gone. I was sending money. You sent money, Martin snapped. You didn't send yourself. That landed harder than Caleb expected. Not because it wasn't manipulative. Because part of it was true. Martin saw it immediately, saw the hesitation, the guilt, and pushed harder. You left me to handle everything. That's not what happened. Really? Martin asked. Who drove her to appointments? Who picked up medication? Who sat with her when she got worse? Caleb's jaw tightened. Martin stepped closer. You got to be the successful son working overseas. His voice softened. I got the responsibility. For a second, Caleb hated that the words hurt, because they touched the exact wound he'd been carrying since arriving home. The fear that maybe he had failed her too. But then he remembered the empty prescription bottles, the unpaid hospital bills, the tarp, the cot, the fear in his mother's eyes. No, Martin frowned. No what? No responsible caregiver leaves someone behind a shed. The words cut through the air. Several conversations nearby stopped. Martin's face darkened. For the first time, his mask slipped. Just a little. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain the house. A muscle twitched in Martin's jaw. Your mother agreed to sell. She says she didn't. She's sick. The answer came too quickly, too smoothly, Caleb noticed. So did a few people nearby. Martin realized it immediately. His expression shifted again. Back to calm, back to reasonable. Medical bills were destroying her. He spread his hands. We had no choice. You sold the house? We protected her. The crowd was paying attention now, not openly, but enough. Martin hated that. Caleb could see it. The public image mattered, maybe more than anything. An older man approached from one of the tents. Everything okay here? Martin smiled instantly. Just family business. The older man nodded, then quietly squeezed Martin's shoulder. You're a good man. Everybody knows that. The praise seemed automatic, practiced. And that was Caleb understood the real challenge. Martin had spent years building credibility. Years becoming the trusted one, the dependable one, the man who showed up, while Caleb was the son who left. Even if the reasons were complicated, even if the money proved otherwise. Public perception had already chosen a side. The confrontation ended a few minutes later. Neither man gained anything, neither man backed down. But as Caleb walked toward his SUV, a woman called his name. He turned. Denise, Martin's wife. She stood near the parking lot entrance, nervous, watching to make sure nobody was paying attention. Caleb hadn't seen her in years. She looked older now, tired, as if carrying something heavy. Denise, she didn't smile. Don't stay long. What? Her eyes darted toward the tents, toward Martin, then back to Caleb. Just be careful. A chill crept through him. Why? She hesitated. For a moment he thought she might say something important. Instead, she shook her head. I shouldn't have come over. Then she turned and started walking away. Denise. She stopped, without facing him. Did Martin steal my mother's house? The question hung between them, long enough to matter, long enough to reveal something. Denise never answered. But she didn't say no. That silence spoke louder than any words. Later that afternoon, Caleb visited the sheriff's office. He spent nearly an hour explaining everything: the money, the deed, the hospital records, the missing notices. The sheriff's deputy listened carefully, then leaned back in his chair. "I understand why you're concerned." Concerned. The word irritated him. "But right now," the deputy continued, "this looks like a civil property dispute." Caleb slid copies of the documents across the desk. "My mother was exploited, maybe," the deputy nodded. "But proving that is different." The answer wasn't satisfying. It was realistic. And somehow that made it worse. Because the system wasn't refusing to help. The system simply needed evidence. Real evidence. More than suspicion. More than anger. When Caleb finally returned to his SUV, the sun was beginning to set. He sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. His phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. 3 words. Nothing else. No explanation. No signature. Just 3 words. "Check the notary." Caleb stared at the screen, then slowly looked back toward town. Someone knew something, and someone had just pointed him toward the first crack in Martin's story. Caleb stared at the message for nearly a minute before the screen went dark. "Check the notary." No greeting, no explanation, just 3 words. He tried calling the number. It was disconnected. That only made him more certain the message mattered. The next morning he sat beside his mother's hospital bed with a legal pad on his lap. Lillian was awake, though still weak. The color had returned slightly to her face, but every movement seemed to drain her energy. "Mom," he said gently, "do you remember who was with you when you signed those papers?" She closed her eyes. For a moment he thought she might not answer. Then she nodded. "Martin, anyone else?" "I don't know." Her voice sounded distant. "He drove me somewhere." "Where?" She shook her head. "I thought it was about insurance." Caleb leaned forward. "What did he tell you?" Lillian's fingers tightened around the blanket. "He said my medical bills were getting worse." She swallowed. "He said if I didn't sign, you'd be responsible for everything." Caleb froze. "What?" He said debt would follow you. Tears formed in her eyes. "You were working so hard." The guilt hit him again. Not because she had believed Martin, because she had been trying to protect him, even then, even while losing everything. Caleb squeezed her hand. "I'm not angry at you." She looked at him. For the first time in days, some of the fear left her eyes. "I'm angry at the person who lied." An hour later, Caleb drove to a law office in downtown Lexington. The brass plaque outside read Mara Whitfield, Elder Law and Estate Litigation. The sheriff's deputy had been right. Suspicion wasn't enough. He needed someone who understood elder exploitation cases, someone who understood paperwork. Mara Whitfield turned out to be a woman in her early 60s with sharp eyes and a calm voice. She listened without interrupting. Hospital records, transfer documents, the deed, bank transfers, the text message, everything. When Caleb finally finished, she folded her hands. "You've got several red flags." The words gave him his first real sense of hope, but there is always a but. She slid the property transfer document across her desk. "This deed was recorded properly." Caleb frowned. "So we're stuck?" "No." She tapped the signature. "But courts don't overturn recorded property transfers because somebody feels something was wrong." Her gaze stayed steady. "We have to prove it." "How?" "Fraud, coercion, lack of capacity, improper notarization." The last phrase caught his attention. "Improper notarization," Mara nodded. "Your mystery texter may have pointed you toward the weakest part of this document." By noon, they were driving toward a small office building on the edge of Claiborne County. A faded sign outside read Roland Price Notary Public. The office looked tired. Peeling paint, old furniture, stacks of paperwork visible through the window. Nolan Price himself appeared to be in his late 60s. His smile vanished the moment he saw the deed in Mara's hand. That reaction alone told Caleb something. Mara introduced herself professionally. "We'd like to ask a few questions regarding this document." Nolan adjusted his glasses. His hand trembled slightly. "Sure." Mara placed the deed on his desk. "Do you remember notarizing this?" Nolan glanced at it too quickly, then nodded yes. "Can you tell us about the signing?" A pause. "It was routine. Who was present?" Another pause. "The woman, Lillian Monroe?" "Yes, and?" Nolan shifted in his chair. "I don't remember everyone." Mara's expression didn't change. "You remember the signing but not who attended?" Silence. Caleb watched sweat appear along the man's forehead. That was months ago. 8 months, Mara corrected. Nolan looked away. Mara opened a notebook. Can we review your notary log? That changed everything. The nervousness became visible. Nolan hesitated long enough for everyone in the room to notice. Then he reluctantly pulled out a large ledger. Mara spent several minutes turning pages. The office grew quiet. Then she stopped. Caleb saw it immediately. Several entries were missing, not blank spaces, removed spaces, pages that seemed oddly interrupted, dates that skipped forward, then backward. Mara looked up. Interesting. Nolan said nothing. She pointed at a section. The deed was notarized on April 12th. He nodded. Mara flipped another page. Yet your log jumps from April 10th to April 14th. The silence stretched, long, uncomfortable. Nolan cleared his throat. I must have made an error. Mara closed the ledger. Maybe. But her voice suggested she didn't believe it, not even slightly. Outside, Caleb felt his pulse racing. Do you think he was involved? Mara stopped beside her car. I think he knows more than he's saying. For the first time since returning home, Caleb felt they had found an actual crack. Not proof, not yet, but a crack. The next breakthrough came from somewhere unexpected. That evening, he returned to the hospital. Lillian looked exhausted. Yet when he told her about the notary, something changed. A memory surfaced. Small, incomplete, but important. Martin was angry that day. Caleb sat up straighter. What day? The papers. She stared at the ceiling. He kept checking his phone. Her voice grew quieter. He said someone wasn't answering. Caleb exchanged a glance with Mara. Who? Lillian closed her eyes. I don't know, but I remember something else. What? He brought the papers to my room. Caleb frowned. Your room? The words hung in the air. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Mara slowly leaned forward. Hospital room? Lillian nodded. I had been admitted because I was confused. Her voice trembled. They said I needed fluids. Caleb felt his stomach drop. Mara's expression hardened instantly. When was this? Lillian mentioned the month. The same month as the property transfer. The same month. Mara stood immediately. Without another word, she pulled out her phone. Within minutes, she was requesting medical records authorization, dates, admission summaries, physician notes, everything. Because if Lillian had been hospitalized when the deed was signed, the entire case changed. Hours later, long after dark, the records arrived electronically. Caleb sat beside Mara in a consultation room to enter the hospital. Neither spoke as she scrolled, page after page, nursing notes, vitals, medication charts. Then Mara stopped, her eyes narrowed. She zoomed in, read again, then looked at Caleb. For the first time since meeting her, she looked genuinely shocked. What is it? She turned the screen toward him, a physician's note, dated exactly 2 days before the deed had been filed. Assessment: patient experiencing confusion, dehydration, and impaired decision-making capacity. Recommendation: delay major financial or legal decisions pending stabilization. The room went silent. Caleb stared at the words, then back at Mara. What does that mean? Her answer came slowly, carefully. It means the deed wasn't just suspicious anymore. She pointed at the date, and then at the filing date. Only 2 days separated them. Mara looked him directly in the eye. Caleb, if this timeline is accurate, someone filed a property transfer while your mother was in no condition to understand what she was signing. She paused, then added the one sentence that changed everything. And that's only if she thought she was signing the deed at all. And that's only if she thought she was signing the deed at all. The sentence sat between them like a weight. Caleb looked back at the medical note. He read it 3 more times, hoping he had misunderstood something. He hadn't. A physician had documented concerns about Lillian's ability to make major decisions. 2 days later, the property transfer had been filed. Not signed, filed. That distinction suddenly mattered. Because nobody knew exactly when she had signed anything, or what she believed she was signing. Mara printed the records and slid them into a growing folder. We're building a case now, she said. Caleb nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. If Martin had lied about the paperwork, what else had he lied about? The next morning, Lillian looked stronger. Not healthy, not recovered, but stronger. She managed to sit up without assistance and even finished most of her breakfast. For the first time, Caleb saw a glimpse of the woman he remembered. The woman who hated wasting food. The woman who always insisted on making coffee before speaking to anyone. That small improvement gave him hope. Then she said something that took it away. Martin used to get my mail. Caleb looked up immediately. What? She lowered her spoon. My mailbox was far from the shed. Her eyes drifted toward the window. He said he'd help. Caleb felt another piece fall into place. Hospital notices, prescription reminders, insurance documents. Everything could have passed through Martin's hands first. How long? A long time. The answer chilled him. Not because of what she said, because she sounded embarrassed, as if trusting her own brother-in-law had somehow been her mistake. That afternoon, Caleb drove back to Briar Creek Road. He didn't go to the house, not yet. Instead, he stopped 2 properties down. A small white bungalow sat beneath a cluster of oak trees. The name on the mailbox read Ron Rebel. Mara had found the name while reviewing local records. Several neighbors had apparently checked on Lillian over the past year. Most refused to talk. Nora hadn't. She answered the door after the second knock. An elderly woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. She studied Caleb for a moment, then nodded. You finally came home. The words hurt more than he expected, not because she meant them cruelly, because she meant them honestly. Caleb introduced himself. Nora invited him inside. The house smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. Everything looked simple, well cared for, lived in. The kind of place where people still answered doors instead of checking security cameras first. Nora sat across from him at the kitchen table. For a while neither spoke. Then she sighed. Your mother waited for you every day. Caleb looked down. Nora continued. Every single day. He swallowed hard. I sent money. I know. The answer surprised him. Nora nodded slowly. She told me. For a moment confusion crossed his face. Then she stood. Without explanation, she disappeared into another room. When she returned, she carried a cardboard box, old, worn, carefully taped shut. She placed it on the table. Lifting the lid revealed a stack of envelopes. Medical bills, utility notices, insurance letters, official correspondence, all addressed to Lillian Monroe. Caleb stared at them. What is this? Nora sat back down. Things your mother asked me to keep. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Why? Nora looked towards the box. She said if anything happened, her son would need to see them. The words landed deep. Caleb reached inside. Every envelope had been opened already. Many contained overdue notices, collection warnings, medical balances, electric service threats. One by one he read them. The dates stretched back more than a year, some almost 2. His chest tightened. Every letter told the same story. The money wasn't being used where it should have been. Then he found something unexpected. A sealed envelope with his own handwriting on it. His breath caught. He recognized it instantly. It was a letter he had mailed from Dubai nearly 18 months earlier. It had never been opened, never reached her. Caleb stared at it. Nora watched quietly. Martin said your mother didn't like letters. The statement sounded absurd. Lillian loved letters, always had. His hands trembled as he turned the envelope over. Still sealed, still carrying international postage, still carrying proof. Martin hadn't just controlled money. He had controlled communication. He had controlled reality. Carefully, Caleb placed the letter aside. Then he noticed another document buried near the bottom. Different paper, different formatting, legal language. His pulse quickened. What is this? Oh, her expression changed. That Caleb folded the document, a will, older, several years old. Lillian Monroe's signature appeared near the bottom. The home, the land, the remaining assets. Everything was designated to Caleb. Not Martin, not anyone else. Caleb looked up. Where did you get this? Your mother gave it to me. The answer stunned him. Nora folded her hands. She was afraid. Of Martin? A long pause followed. Then Nora nodded. He started changing after the construction business failed. The statement matched something Caleb had already heard. A failed investment, growing debt, financial pressure. But hearing it from someone who had watched it happen felt different, more real, more dangerous. Nora leaned forward. One day I heard him threatening her. Caleb froze. What did he say? He said if she kept asking questions, he could have people declare her incompetent. The words hit like a punch, not physically, emotionally, because they explained something. The fear, the silence, the way Lillian hesitated before speaking. She hadn't simply been neglected, she had been intimidated. For months, maybe years. Caleb spent another hour going through the box. Every item seemed to reveal another layer, another deception, another lie. Then near the bottom he found one final envelope, different from the others, official, bank stationery, unopened, addressed not to Lillian, to him. His full legal name printed across the front. Cape frowned. "I've never seen this." Nora shook her head. "Neither had I." Slowly he opened it. Inside was a formal notice from a regional bank. His eyes moved across the page, then stopped. He read the line again and again. His blood ran cold. The letter referenced an account linked to funds being managed on behalf of Lillian Monroe, an account listing Martine Vale as an authorized administrator, and somehow Caleb Monroe as the reference holder. He looked up at Nora, then back at the letter, because he had never opened that account, never signed for it, never authorized anyone to use his name, and suddenly he understood that the stolen house might only be one piece of a much larger fraud. The letter shook slightly in Caleb's hand. He read the account number again, then the account holder information, then the authorization section. Nothing changed. The bank had linked his name to an account he had never seen before. Martine Vale was listed as an authorized manager for expenses related to Lillian Monroe's care. Caleb folded the document carefully and slipped it into his folder. For the first time, he felt something beyond anger. He felt calculation. Whoever built this scheme had not relied on one lie. They had built layers: the house, the mail, the hospital paperwork, the deed, and now a bank account. Nora watched him quietly. "What does it mean?" Caleb exhaled slowly. "It means Martin wasn't just taking money." He looked back at the letter. "It means he may have created a system to take it." That evening he drove straight to Mara's office. She was still there despite the late hour. Stacks of case files covered her desk. The moment she saw the bank letter, her expression sharpened. "Where did you get this?" "Nora Bell." Mara read every line carefully. Then she read it again. "This is interesting." Interesting. The words sounded far too calm. Caleb sat down. "Mara, tell me what I'm looking at." She leaned back. "You're looking at a financial trail." His pulse quickened. She pointed to several lines on the document. "This account wasn't opened recently. How old is it?" She checked the paperwork. Almost 3 years. The exact moment Caleb had left for Dubai. A cold silence filled the room. Neither needed to say it. Both were thinking the same thing. The timing wasn't random. Mara opened her laptop. "Let's verify everything before we draw conclusions." Within minutes, she was on the phone with the bank's fraud department. The next 48 hours moved quickly. Requests were filed. Authorization forms were signed. Records were requested. The process wasn't dramatic. It was paperwork, phone calls, waiting, verification. The kind of slow process that often stood between suspicion and proof. Meanwhile, Caleb spent most of his time at the hospital. Lillian continued improving. She still tired easily, but her mind felt clearer every day. One afternoon, he found her sitting by the window reading a magazine. The sight nearly stopped him. A week earlier, she had been lying beneath a tarp. Now she was sitting upright with sunlight on her face. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she smiled, a real smile. Small, fragile, but real. "You look tired." Caleb laughed softly. "So do you." That earned another smile. For a few minutes they talked about ordinary things: the weather, the hospital food, the ridiculous television shows she hated. The conversation felt normal, painfully normal, the kind of normal they should have had years ago. Then her expression changed. "Caleb," he looked up. "There's something I need to tell you." His stomach tightened. Lillian looked toward the window. "I stopped asking questions after a while." "What do you mean?" "About the money." She swallowed. "At first I kept asking Martin where it was going." Caleb remained silent. He always had an answer. Her eyes drifted downward. "Then eventually I got tired." The confession hurt more than anger would have, because it sounded like defeat, not weakness, exhaustion, the kind that comes after fighting alone too long. Caleb reached for her hand. "You don't have to carry that anymore." Tears filled her eyes, not dramatic tears, just quiet ones, the kind people cry when they finally stop pretending to be strong. 3 days later, the bank records arrived. Mara called him immediately. "Get over here." The urgency in her voice left no room for questions. By noon, Caleb sat across from her desk. Several folders lay open, printed statements covered the table. Mara pushed one stack toward him. "Start here," he did. At first, the numbers meant nothing: deposits, withdrawals, transfers. Then patterns emerged. His patterns. The dates matched his transfers from Dubai almost exactly. Every month, without fail, the money entered the account, then disappeared. Caleb's chest tightened. "Where did it go?" Mara pointed. "Casino payments, sports betting sites, personal loan services, a construction lender." Credit card balances, thousands, then tens of thousands. The deeper they looked, the uglier it became. None of the withdrawals resembled caregiving expenses. Almost none. Prescription payments were tiny, medical expenses were sporadic, utilities appeared occasionally, just enough to make the account look legitimate. Everything else fed Martin's debts. Caleb sat back, speechless. The evidence felt overwhelming, yet somehow the emotional impact hit harder than the financial loss, because every transaction represented a decision, every withdrawal represented a choice. Martin hadn't stolen once. He had stolen repeatedly, month after month, year after year, while looking Lillian in the eye, while calling Caleb family. Mara handed him another page. This may be the most important one. He looked down. The document showed account authorization records, electronic signatures, opening documents, identity verification, everything required when the account was created. Caleb stared. Something felt wrong immediately. The email listed on the account wasn't his. The phone number wasn't his. Even the mailing address wasn't his. Everything routed back to Martin, a setup designed to keep Caleb completely unaware. Mara folded her arms. This wasn't carelessness. No, it was deliberate. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Caleb asked the question that had haunted him since returning home. Why? Mara looked at him carefully. Because he needed money that much? She slid another document forward. A county court filing, judgment records, debt actions, construction liens, failed business claims. The total exceeded anything Caleb expected. Martin wasn't simply greedy. He was drowning, and apparently had been drowning for years. Suddenly several pieces fit together. The failed construction company, the pressure, the image of success, the need to keep appearances alive, the admiration of the community, the expensive truck, the charity events, the reputation. All of it had required money, money he didn't have. Money Caleb had unknowingly provided. That evening Caleb left the office carrying copies of everything. For the first time he possessed real evidence. Not theories, not suspicions, evidence. Yet instead of relief, he felt heavier, because proof brought consequences, and consequences would eventually bring confrontation. The next morning another surprise arrived. A courier delivered legal documents directly to the hospital. The envelope bore Martin's attorney's letterhead. Caleb opened it in the hallway. His eyes moved quickly across the pages, then stopped. He read the first paragraph again, and then a third time. His stomach dropped. Martin wasn't retreating, he was attacking. The filing requested emergency guardianship over Lillian Monroe. According to the petition, Martin claimed Caleb had suddenly returned, emotionally manipulated a vulnerable elderly woman, and was attempting to influence her decisions regarding property and finances. For several seconds Caleb couldn't breathe. Then he looked through the glass toward his mother's room. Lillian sat quietly by the window, unaware, still recovering, still fragile. And now Martin was trying to take legal control of her again. This time through the court system. Martin wasn't retreating, he was attacking. Caleb stood frozen in the hospital hallway, the guardianship petition still open in his hands. Nurses passed behind him, a food cart rattled by. Life continued around him while his world narrowed to a few pages of legal language. According to the filing, Martin had been Lillian's primary caregiver for years. According to the filing, Caleb had returned suddenly, after becoming financially successful, and was attempting to influence a vulnerable elderly woman for personal gain. According to the filing, Martin was acting only out of concern. The lies were so polished they almost sounded believable. Almost. Ked folded the documents and headed straight for Mara's office. She finished reading the petition in less than 10 minutes. Then she dropped it onto her desk. He's scared. Caleb frowned. This doesn't look scared, it is. She tapped the filing. People who think they're winning don't rush into court asking for emergency control. The statement settled over him. Mara leaned back in her chair. He knows we're getting close. For the first time since the petition arrived, Caleb felt a small measure of relief. Because she was right. Martin wasn't acting from strength, he was acting from fear. Still, fear could be dangerous. The next few days became a race. Mara filed responses, collected medical records, requested financial documentation, prepared affidavits. Every hour mattered. Meanwhile, Lillian continued recovering. Not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily. One afternoon, a hospital social worker met privately with her. Another day, a physician completed an updated cognitive assessment. The results helped. Lillian remained physically fragile, but her thinking was clear. That distinction mattered. A lot. Because guardianship cases often centered on capacity, and Martin's entire argument depended on portraying Lillian as incapable of making her own decisions. The irony was almost unbearable. For years he had treated her as if her voice didn't matter. Now he wanted the court to officially silence it. 3 days before the hearing, a court-appointed evaluator arrived. Her name was Susan Mercer, professional, calm, thorough. She met first with Caleb, then with medical staff, then with Lillian alone. The interview lasted nearly an hour. Caleb waited outside the room the entire time. Every minute felt longer than the last. When Susan finally emerged, her expression revealed nothing, not approval, not concern, nothing. Professional neutrality, which somehow felt worse. What did she say? Caleb asked. Susan offered a polite smile. I'll include my findings in the report. Then she walked away. The uncertainty gnawed at him. That night he barely slept. The next morning brought another surprise. Martin showed up at the hospital. Caleb spotted him the moment the elevator doors opened. His uncle wore a pressed button-down shirt and carried a folder under one arm. He looked exactly like the respectable community figure everyone expected. Martin stopped when he saw Caleb. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Martin smiled. The same practiced smile Caleb had seen at the fundraiser. I'm here to see Lillian. No, the answer came immediately. Martin's smile faded. I have every right. No. Caleb stepped between him and the hallway leading to her room, not without her permission. A flash of irritation crossed Martin's face, then disappeared. You're making a mistake. Caleb shook his head. The mistake was trusting you. Several nurses glanced over. Martin noticed. Of course he did. He always noticed who was watching. His voice softened. You're emotional. I'm done being manipulated. The words landed harder than Caleb expected. Because they weren't aimed only at Martin. They were aimed at himself. At the version of himself who had accepted excuses for years. At the version who had believed distance could replace presence. Martin's expression hardened. For a brief moment the mask slipped. What do you think you're going to accomplish? Caleb held his gaze. The truth. The answer seemed to irritate Martin more than any accusation. Before he could respond, a hospital social worker approached. I'm sorry, sir. She addressed Martin directly. Mrs. Monroe has requested no unsupervised visits. The silence that followed was satisfying, not dramatic, just satisfying. For once somebody had listened to Lillian's wishes. Martin stared at the social worker, then at Caleb, then back toward the elevators. Without another word he turned and left, but the look he gave Caleb before disappearing told its own story. This wasn't over, not even close. Later that afternoon another crack appeared, a small one, but important. Denise called. Caleb almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar. The voice wasn't. Can we meet? Her tone sounded nervous, scared even. He agreed. They met that evening at a quiet coffee shop outside town. Denise arrived 20 minutes late. She kept checking the windows, the parking lot, the door, like someone afraid of being seen. Finally she sat down. Neither touched their drinks. For a while she simply stared at the table. Then she spoke. Martin wasn't always like this. Caleb remained silent. Denise laughed bitterly. I know how that sounds. She rubbed her forehead. Nobody wakes up one day planning to become a thief. The statement lingered. Not because it excused anything, because it felt honest. He started gambling after the construction business collapsed. Caleb nodded. He already knew part of that story. What he didn't know was how deep it went. Denise continued. At first it was sports betting. Her eyes filled with exhaustion. Then loans, then bigger loans. She shook her head. Every time he lost money, he thought the next win would fix everything. Caleb had seen that pattern before, not personally, but enough to recognize it. A person digging deeper every time they hit bottom, trying to escape the hole by continuing to dig. Denise looked up. I should have stopped him. The guilt in her voice sounded real. Maybe for the first time. What happened with my mother? A long silence followed, then Denise whispered, I saw one of the signings. Caleb's pulse quickened. What signing? The papers. The room suddenly felt smaller. Denise clasped her hands together. Martin told her they were financial forms. His stomach tightened. What kind? She shook her head. I wasn't shown everything. The answer frustrated him, but it was still something, more than he had before. Then Denise said something that changed the conversation. "There's one thing I've never understood." Caleb waited. She hesitated, then looked directly at him. When Martin came home that day, he was angry. Why? He kept saying the timing was wrong. The words sounded familiar, like an unfinished puzzle. Denise swallowed. He said somebody at the bank had almost ruined everything. Caleb's heartbeat slowed. Not from relief, from realization. The bank, the hidden account, the fake caregiving expenses, the forged paperwork. Maybe Martin hadn't acted alone. Maybe someone inside the system had helped him, or tried to stop him. Denise seemed to read the thought on his face, because her next sentence came quietly, almost like a confession. There was another name. Caleb leaned forward. What name? She opened her mouth, then stopped. Fear crossed her face, real fear, the kind that doesn't disappear quickly, the kind that comes from knowing too much. Finally she whispered, "I can't say it here." And suddenly, Caleb realized Denise was still hiding something far bigger than a forged signature. "I can't say it here." Denise's voice was barely above a whisper. The fear in her eyes was real enough to stop Caleb from pushing further. She glanced toward the coffee shop window again, then toward the door, then back at him. Martin isn't the only person worried about this case. Caleb leaned forward. "What does that mean?" Denise shook her head. "I already said too much." "Denise." "No," the answer came fast. Too fast. Like she'd rehearsed it, she grabbed her purse and stood. For a second, Caleb thought she was about to leave. Instead, she pulled a folded piece of paper from inside her wallet. She slid it across the table. "Don't call me. What is this? Just look at it." Then she walked out. No goodbye, no explanation, just fear. Caleb unfolded the paper after she disappeared into the parking lot. It contained a name, nothing else, no address, no note, just 2 words. Nolan Price. The name felt familiar, very familiar. Then it clicked, the notary. The same notary whose seal appeared on the deed transfer. Caleb stared at the paper. Why would Denise risk meeting him only to give him that? And why was she so afraid? By the time he reached Mara's office, she already had an answer. Nolan Price. She immediately recognized the name. The notary. Caleb handed her the paper. Mara frowned. Interesting, that word again. Interesting. He was beginning to hate it. Mara opened several documents and pulled out a copy of the deed. Nolan's notary stamp sat clearly at the bottom. For a deed transfer like this, his testimony matters. "You think he's involved?" "I think he knows something." The answer wasn't satisfying, but it was honest. The next morning they drove to Nolan Price's office. It occupied a small suite above an insurance agency. Nothing impressive, nothing suspicious, just a typical local business. Nolan himself looked equally ordinary. Mid-60s, gray hair, reading glasses, a man who seemed more comfortable with paperwork than conflict. At first he welcomed them politely. That changed the moment Mara mentioned the Monroe deed. His smile vanished, his shoulders tightened. The reaction lasted less than a second, but it was enough. Mara noticed it too. "We just have a few questions." Nolan adjusted his glasses. "I already signed an affidavit months ago." "About what?" "The property transfer." Caleb exchanged a glance with Mara. "Months ago?" Before any challenge had even been filed. That detail immediately felt wrong. Mara remained calm. "Can you walk us through the signing?" Nolan hesitated, only briefly, but he hesitated. Mrs. Monroe appeared. "When?" He named a date. Mara wrote it down. "Where my office? Was anyone with her?" Another pause. Then he answered. Martin. Caleb's jaw tightened. Mara continued. "Did Mrs. Monroe appear mentally competent?" "Yes." The answer came quickly. Too quickly, almost automatic. Mara nodded, then pulled out hospital records. She slid them across the desk. "That's interesting." Nolan's eyes moved to the date, then back to Mara, then back to the records. The color slowly drained from his face, because the records showed something important. Lillian had been admitted to the hospital during that period, dehydrated, disoriented, confused, not permanently incapacitated, but medically compromised. Mara didn't need to say anything. The contradiction spoke for itself. For the first time, Nolan looked uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. "We'd like to see your notary log." The request hung in the air. Nolan swallowed. "That's not standard." It is when a notarized document is being challenged. The room became silent. Finally, Nolan stood and retrieved a large ledger. He placed it on the desk. Mara began turning pages. Caleb watched her expression carefully. At first, nothing changed. Then it did. One page, then another. Then she stopped. Nolan, his face tightened. "Yes? Why are these entries missing?" The silence felt endless. Several dates had been skipped entirely, not crossed out, not corrected, gone. Empty spaces where records should have existed. Nolan removed his glasses. For the first time he looked tired. Not defensive, tired. Mara gently closed the book. "We're not accusing you of anything." The statement was deliberate. Caleb could tell. She was giving him a way out. A chance to tell the truth before being cornered. Nolan stared at the ledger, then at the window, then finally at Caleb. "What happened to your mother wasn't right." The admission landed heavily. "Not a confession, not yet but close. What happened?" Caleb asked quietly. Nolan rubbed his forehead. "Martin came to me more than once." The room went still. "He said his sister-in-law was struggling." "Did she sign the deed?" Nolan looked away. "I saw signatures." That wasn't an answer. Mara noticed immediately. "You saw signatures?" Nolan nodded. "Yes. You didn't witness every signature being placed on paper." The question struck directly at the center. Nolan didn't respond, which was answer enough. A long silence followed. Then he spoke. "I made mistakes." His voice sounded older now. "Kay told me everything was legalizing. Not explosive anger, cold anger, the dangerous kind. My mother lost her home." Nolan lowered his eyes. "I know." For a moment nobody spoke. Then Nolan surprised them. "There may be something else." Mara sat forward. "What?" Nolan opened a drawer. Inside sat several archived files. He pulled one out, then another. Finally he stopped. His fingers rested on a thin folder. A folder marked with Martin Vale's name. Nolan stared at it for several seconds, as though deciding something. Then he handed it to Mara. "Take this." She opened it. Inside were copies of notarized documents connected to Martin's failed construction company, loan agreements, property filings, debt restructuring paperwork. Nothing immediately shocking until one page appeared. Mara froze. Caleb saw it happen instantly. "What is it?" She didn't answer right away. Instead she slowly turned the page toward him. A familiar account number appeared near the bottom, the same hidden account connected to Caleb's stolen money. But that wasn't what stunned her. There was another signature, one that shouldn't have existed. A signature supposedly belonging to Lillian Monroe, dated nearly 6 months before Martin claimed she had ever agreed to sell anything. Caleb stared at it. His heartbeat quickened, because the signature wasn't attached to the house, or a loan, or caregiving expenses. It was attached to something far more dangerous. A personal guarantee making Lillian legally responsible for one of Martin's collapsing business debts. And for the first time, Caleb realized Martin may have started using Lillian's identity long before the house was ever stolen. The hearing began on a gray morning that matched the tension hanging over everyone in the courtroom. Lillian sat beside Caleb, wrapped in a light sweater. She looked smaller than she once had, thinner too, but she sat upright. Her hands trembled slightly, yet her eyes were clear. For the first time in years, nobody spoke for her. She spoke for herself. Across the room, Martin sat beside his attorney. The confident man Caleb had known all his life seemed to have disappeared. The expensive watch was gone. The polished smile was gone. Even his posture looked different. Pressure had finally found him. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. Mara stood first. She did not begin with emotion. She began with facts, hospital records, medication histories, evidence of untreated heart failure, documentation showing periods when Lillian had been hospitalized, confused, dehydrated, and dependent on others for information. Then came the bank records. Thousands of dollars Caleb had sent from Dubai. Transfers clearly labeled for medical care, housing expenses, insurance payments, and support. The money trail led somewhere very different. Gambling losses, debt payments, personal accounts, failed business obligations. Martin's attorney tried to object. The judge overruled him. Then Mara presented the deed records, the notary logs, the missing entries, the suspicious timeline, one piece after another. The story Martin had built over 3 years began falling apart. But the moment that changed everything came when Nolan Price took the stand. The aging notary looked exhausted, like a man who had spent months carrying a weight he could no longer hold. Under questioning, he admitted Martin had brought documents to him after normal business hours. He admitted the log entries had not been completed properly. He admitted Martin had pressured him to backdate records. The courtroom became very quiet. Martin stared straight ahead. For the first time, even his attorney looked worried. Then Denise testified. Her voice shook at first. But she kept going. She described the debts, the gambling, the lies. The way Martin convinced Lillian that Caleb had stopped sending money. The way he controlled mail, medical notices, and financial information. The way fear slowly replaced trust. Several times she stopped speaking to wipe tears from her face. Nobody interrupted her. Nobody needed to. The truth was finally speaking for itself. When it was over, Mara called one final witness. Lillian. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as she slowly approached the stand. She looked fragile, but when she spoke, her voice carried farther than anyone expected. She described signing papers she never understood. She described being told Caleb no longer cared. She described sitting alone outside the house she once owned while believing her son had forgotten her. For a moment, emotion caught in her throat. Caleb felt his own eyes burn. Then Lillian looked directly at the judge. I trusted family. The room became completely silent, and I was wrong. Nothing more needed to be said. By the end of the day, the decision came. The judge denied Martin's petition for guardianship. Lillian would retain control over her own decisions. Additional protections were ordered immediately. Martin was prohibited from interfering with her care. Disputed assets were frozen pending further proceedings. The deed transfer would face formal legal challenge through the proper process, and evidence of fraud, financial exploitation, and possible forgery would be referred for criminal investigation. It wasn't instant justice, it wasn't a perfect ending, but it was real. And for the first time in years, the law was listening to Lillian instead of speaking over her. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Questions flew in every direction. Martin walked past them without answering. The man who had spent years protecting his reputation now had no reputation left to protect. The investigation took months. Documents were reviewed. Financial records were examined. Interviews were conducted. One by one, the remaining pieces surfaced. The settled debt Martin had used to manipulate Lillian, the caregiving funds he had diverted, the false explanations, the forged trust. Everything eventually became part of the official record. Charges followed. So did financial consequences. So did public embarrassment. None of it happened overnight, but consequences arrived. Eventually, they always did. Denise moved into a small apartment across town. She wasn't instantly forgiven, not by Caleb, not by Lillian, but her testimony had helped stop the abuse, and for now that mattered. Months later, after negotiations, legal pressure, and settlements, the property finally returned to Lillian's control. Caleb could have sold it. Part of him had considered it. The memories were painful. The place carried scars. But Lillian made a different choice. She wanted to the broken version, not to the bragged one. So Caleb rebuilt it. The collapsing porch was replaced. The roof was repaired. Fresh paint covered weathered boards. New windows filled the rooms with light. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't luxury, it was dignity, and that was worth more. Beside the house, Caleb funded a small assistance program in Lillian's name. Nothing grand. No publicity campaign. No ribbon-cutting ceremony. Just practical help for older adults facing neglect, isolation, or financial exploitation. The kind of help his mother had needed when nobody was listening. One autumn evening, nearly a year after he found her beneath that tarp, Caleb sat beside Lillian on the restored porch. The sun was setting beyond the Kentucky hills. A soft porch light glowed above them. Lillian held a warm mug between her hands. For a long time neither spoke. They simply sat together. The silence felt different now, not empty, peaceful. Finally, Lillian looked toward him. You came back. Caleb smiled sadly. I should have come sooner. Maybe that regret would never completely disappear. Some wounds healed slowly. Some never healed all the way. But they no longer lived inside a lie. Lillian reached over and squeezed his hand. And for the first time since returning home, Caleb stopped feeling like he was trying to rescue his mother. Because she wasn't a victim anymore. She was simply his mother, a woman whose truth had finally been believed. As darkness settled over the porch, the light above them remained warm and steady. If this story stayed with you, let us know what choice you think mattered most in the end. And if someone is still waiting for your call, maybe today is the right day to make it.